Welcome to Zero Knowledge, a podcast where we explore the latest in blockchain technology and the decentralized web. The show is hosted by me, Anna.
And me, Frederick. Today we sit down with Griff Green to hear his very special story from the DAO to the White Hat Group to Giveth.
In this week's episode, we're going to be talking about something called the DAO. But the DAO sometimes gets confused with the concept of a DAO. So, Frederick, maybe we can start by defining what a DAO is.
So a DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization. And the idea is you organize people around or with an Ethereum smart contract, or organize people or assets or what have you in a completely autonomous fashion. So you don't have a CEO that dictates everything, and everything is a little bit more fluid. And there's a very specific time in Ethereum's history when DAOs were talked about a lot, and there was a specific DAO that was started called the DAO. And as we'll hear in the interview, there's a reason behind that name. But it's stuck as the DAO, and people always talk about the DAO as a thing. And this is one specific DAO that was started, and the goal was to raise a bunch of money and then distribute that money to projects. Let people vote, let investors vote how this money is distributed, and then the idea was to generate revenue off of these projects that got funded and pay back the token holders.
But as we know, history had a different path planned for this DAO, for the DAO.
Right. So it got hacked. It was a really big thing. A lot of people had a lot of money in this, and eventually it finished in a hard fork. And this is a big part of Ethereum's history. It was a large event.
And this has definitely colored a lot of the decision-making and thinking around the space since then. And so I think anyone who enters the space will definitely hear about this. In this episode, we actually get a chance to speak to someone who was there right in the front row, kind of seeing all of this unfold. And so this is why this is kind of an exciting episode to share.
So we're sitting down in this episode with Griff Green, who I think it merits painting a little bit of wider picture of him. He gets to introduce himself in this episode, but he's a very humble guy. Super nice guy, but he's a big player in the Ethereum community. Everyone loves him. If you go to a conference, there's Griff hugs going around all over the place. And he's just a really great guy, and he has this persona in the community. And I think, like you said, he was actually involved in coding on the DAO and other projects since, and really has this sort of first row, very personal experience to share with this, which is why I think it's a very unique story to hear.
This was actually recorded right after EdCon in Toronto at the beginning of May. We didn't get a chance to air this until now, but we've been sitting on this episode and we've been really excited to share it because I know, Frederick, you and I sitting there hearing this story, we were kind of on the edge of our seats. And I really hope you guys like it. Here it goes.
We have a very special episode with guest Griff Green. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
Welcome.
So we'll maybe start digging in a little bit of your history and you as a person, because you have fascinating history. You've been in this space for a long time. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, let's see. I was a I have a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering, and kind of was doing the normal, corporate thing for a little bit, and then just couldn't handle it and became a crazy hippie. And I was traveling around. I've been nomadic for about 7 years. And I'm a huge burner. I love Burning Man. That's like a yearly ritual that keeps me going. I actually run Camp Decentral, and so we have a lot of cryptocurrency and decentralists that come in. Like, it's not all crypto. It's like C-Steady and any of those things. So we try to bring that to the playa and give a lot of people that exposure. And I guess I ended up getting into crypto, as a lot of people did, in 2013 when the price went through the roof. I had already invested into some because I'm just crazy. Okay. Like, I was literally living off of physical gold and silver that I like bought off of my corporate sellout. So I just was selling that, as I was traveling through some people, and crypto seemed like a lot easier to handle than gold and silver. So I was blown away when it went through the roof, when Bitcoin went to 1,000 and Litecoin went from $2.50 to $40. And I was just like, what is this? And the more I read, the more obsessed I got, to the point where I was just spending all my time in it. And I just decided, like, I'm out of here. I went to Ecuador and wanted to become a Bitcoin evangelist like Andreas Antonopoulos, and was like pushing really hard there. And then, unfortunately, Ecuador decided to make digital currencies illegal. So that whole idea kind of went out the window of being like a small fish in a smaller pond, So I was getting a master's degree in digital currencies with the University of Nicosia, and I started working with Slockit. And then, of course, Slockit became a really important piece of Ethereum history, I guess, with the DAO. And when the DAO I was community manager for Slockit and the DAO. And then when the DAO got hacked, I helped organize the recovery and redistribution of the funds that were recovered from pretty much every angle, and learned a lot through that whole thing. And that's what started Giveth.
Go back to those early days when you were getting into it. What was it like? What was the community like then?
It was not nearly as cool as it is now. I definitely have to say, there was, as a newcomer into the space, I had never really used Reddit. I was still getting used to the different tools where people interact, and Bitcoin talk forums. I actually didn't have a computer for several years before cryptocurrency. Just because, I was nomadic, I was traveling. It's kind of heavy to carry around.
Yeah.
So,
especially back then.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't need it that much. You can go get a computer somewhere else. So, there was a little bit of, I've always been tech savvy and generally cool with it. But, getting used to these Reddits and getting used to the way people talk in subreddits, and just that whole, I don't know, I'm kind of a lovey-dovey guy. I'm not really into all this shit talking that happens. Oh, hey, can I swear? How does that work?
Totally.
That's fantastic. Okay, so then when I found Ethereum, and the subreddit was so amazing, it's just the fact that they took out the money out of the conversation just raised the level of everybody's awareness, and everyone was so nice. And I made this. I was never really a coder, but I made my first Solidity smart contract for a homework assignment. And I wanted to make it a walkthrough because I had to explain the Solidity program to my professor anyway. So I was like, I'll make this a blog post for Slockit. And Alex Van de Sande actually edited it and improved it. And I was just like, well, and he did it in such a nice way. It was like, no one trolled me on my crappy code. And I just couldn't believe how sweet everyone was in Ethereum. And that sucked me in. I was like, this is where I'm hanging out. I'm done. Ethereum is home.
Wow. It sounds a bit like Afri. We talked to him about the early days, and he had a similar...
I think it's actually, it's cool to hear that the space has been like that. And I still see that to some degree. But going back to when we were talking to Afri about this topic, he said that in 2017, when the price really boomed, that the community kind of changed tone from being this awesome, super helpful place to being a lot more toxic, to being a lot more about pushing the ICOs maybe to some degree, but not necessarily. Just generally the tone changed. Have you found that as well?
Absolutely. For me, it happened really after the DAO. The DAO Slack was a really sweet place to hang out back in the day. And then after the hack, it was it wasn't really after the hack. It was 3 days after the hack. Just all sorts of weird accounts started coming in and just like bombarding the place with horrible trolling and really like, just not productive conversation. And there is like, I don't know how much of a conspiracy theory it is or what, but there's this Blockstream funded organization called the Dragon's Den that actually supposedly pays trolls to come into different chat rooms and really disrupt the flow and the engagement of things. And honestly, the way it is, there's so much money in this space, we really can't put past the idea that there might be some kind of like force at hand here. I mean, you see all these phishing accounts, you see how social media can be manipulated to push certain agendas. And I think Ethereum's big enough where that's definitely happening. And so it's really hard. It's really hard to find a safe place to like get true signals.
Can I ask, because we keep mentioning the DAO, but I think on this podcast, we've never really talked in depth about what it was, what the original idea was, and what happened. Can you give us a bit of a history?
Sure. Slockit originally started building the DAO with this idea that we would create a place, because this was before ICOs, right? The ICOs were happening, but not like as easily as they happen today, where there's 10 ICOs a day, right? The idea was, let's put a place where people can vote on different proposals to like figure out what ideas are best to fund and then have them compete against each other in this like arena. And the DAO was going to be the place where DAO token holders could choose which projects they want to support with a very simple governance model. In fact, one of the things about the DAO is we let it be named the DAO. I mean, because we wanted it to truly be decentralized. And we saw that Slockit was a clear central point of organization, and we didn't want to name it. So that's why it was called the DAO. We were hoping that eventually it would vote to make its name something else, right? So Slockit was building the DAO, and then we were a little low on funding, honestly. And we pushed the thing forward as fast as we could because we saw that as a clear funding mechanism for what we called the Universal Sharing Network, which was my baby. I loved the Universal Sharing Network. The idea was that we could create a true sharing economy where objects could be really owned by a collective, and it would be like almost a rental economy at first, but then when we introduce like autonomous objects and really build the community around this piece of technology, we could distribute resources more effectively than we do today. That was kind of the dream, but of course that dream did not happen for many reasons. It wasn't. There was definitely the bug was the killer, but honestly, I'm pretty skeptical that the DAO would have been a success anyway, or at least it wasn't looking very promising because there was this moratorium that happened right after we raised all the funds that a lot of people were trying to stop the DAO from working because the governance wasn't really very well thought out, or it wasn't perfect. There were definitely biases towards one way or another, and it was a really young project, and it got too big too fast, and it became a dangerous thing for the Ethereum community. So when the DAO hack actually happened, we were 3 weeks in, and we had proposed some security things, additions that may have helped it, but it was too little too late. And there were, I woke up one day and the funds were being drained, and I had to just kind of like call it and tell everyone, hey guys, we're being hacked. This is not a drill. Like, watch out. Like, we don't know what to do. We had some actions. We tried to get people to spam the network to slow the bleed, but
I was sitting front row. I was not, I joined Parity relatively recently, but I was sitting front row for when that was happening. And I remember it's like this call to action to actually spam the network, and people responded. I thought it was pretty amazing. Like, that was the first time as well that I saw like there was actually It's funny that you say like it was like 3 days after the hack that the subreddit turned toxic, and while the hack was going on, and like in that first day, in the first 2 days, and there was like a sense of community, and like everyone was actually trying to help out. I viscerally remember that, and it was a cool experience.
Yeah, I mean, we got really lucky because right after the hack happened, pretty much maybe 2 or 3 hours after I made the announcement, there was already a relatively strong consensus that a hard fork would be the way to go to stop the attacker. I think it might have even happened before the attack had finished, that we had relatively come to the idea of a hard fork would solve this. We can just because the magic of the DAO, we did have a unintentional security feature that the funds were locked in place for a certain amount of time. And that in this case, it was 35 days. We had 35 days where we knew those funds would not move. So we had 35 days that we could actually rewrite the code in Ethereum to take the money from the hacker and put it somewhere else. And so all of a sudden we had this time, like a pertinence, like there was a time limit that we had to work in, and we had a mission, and we had an enemy, and it just it all made sense to push this hard fork. And because we could start that narrative, I could help start that narrative early with podcasts and pushing and trying to rally the community around these ideas. It worked out really well. And really, we did have a strong consensus around the hard fork. And when there were and that's when, when it seemed like there was a pretty good consensus, that's when all the dissent came in. That's when all the people, in my opinion, from the outside, Bitcoiners with an agenda, came in to really, seed distrust in what the general community was rallying around. And so then it kept, we just had all the devs kept working, and there were lots of little things. We tried a soft fork, and then that wasn't going to work for technical reasons. And then in the end, we barely got the hard fork through. And while all that was happening, the White Hat group had a lot of adventures, honestly. There were some crazy things going on that most people don't really know about.
I'd love to dig into some of those adventures, but maybe I thought that others have raised with me, and something that I'm interested in and have thought some about myself is what if the DAO hard fork never happened? And the concept of a DAO has been tainted. There hasn't really been anyone trying to do a major DAO in the past 2 years or whatever since this happened. And have we lost this concept, or has this been a detriment to the community that this happened, or what's your opinion on this?
Well, there's kind of 2 ways I can answer that question, right? So I'm going to pause so you can pick your favorite. There's the DAOs have definitely gotten a bad name because of the DAO. And that was one of the things that we, as the White Hat group, really wanted to alleviate with Giveth. We started Giveth because we knew, or at least we could see the writing was on the wall, that DAOs were considered either, not safe to try anymore. And that decentralization and trying to have a blockchain-based entity might be seen as a bad idea. And that was definitely the case. You see everyone, the only smart contracts people are trusting money with is multisigs. And man, even those are not necessarily safe.
They're pretty hard to write, apparently.
Yeah. No, I mean, smart contracts in general are not safe. We're early days in this, and there's a lot of money involved. I honestly think that there would be a lot. The problem is that real security features are centralizing, and there's first off, there's a lot of idealism in this space. You don't want to centralize if you don't have to, right? Also, you want to avoid liability. When you centralize, all of a sudden you become responsible, right? In my opinion, Ether in an experimental contract should be wrapped in a contract that has an escape hatch, right? And you move that wrapped Ether around, and at any time, if something goes wrong, one person can pull the escape hatch, which sends it to some trusted multisig like the white hat multisig, and they can redistribute the funds, right? That's like the safest way. But in the end, that's all inspired by the DAO and the problem that happened there. And it's really sad to me.
I have a question about that. I know you have a second answer there, but do you feel like, because I think when we speak to a few people about the DAO, like, do you feel like it was traumatic? Like, or was it the biggest learning experience? Now, I'm
more on the learning experience. I'm generally an optimistic kind of guy. You know, I don't know. Maybe a lot of my friends have told me that I have like the opposite of depression, right? Like a chemical imbalance that just like keeps it going.
I would love to have that.
Yeah. It's a different kind of thing. And so like I didn't actually experience any trauma from the DAO, which I mean, it definitely affected my life, but honestly, I always have this perspective that like the hardest things and most difficult things that have ever happened to me have been the most important things that have ever happened to me, right? And I feel that way for the Ethereum ecosystem. We had a chance early days to experiment with a really contentious hard fork. And it is really important. Like the current hard fork that we're working on and thinking about, like we are able to make these decisions much more informed because of that, major issue that affected so many people and really put it in people's minds about smart contract security and the idea, like we learned how hard forks work, that most people didn't know that a currency is always created. You know, most people just, now that's obvious, right? You know, there's so many clear lessons about like how to deal with hard forks, which is something that every blockchain needs to really consider now. And it was mostly learned from the DAO experience.
You had started with two different sort of paths. What was the second path?
The second path is what happened if the DAO had never happened, like literally, like what would have happened in Ethereum, right? So this actually brings me back a little bit to the things that people don't know about that the White Hat group was doing kind of in secret, right? Because we didn't want to divulge our movements to the DAO hacker. And there were actually 7 DAO hackers. And we were able to pass proposals that would move the extra balance. There was a bunch of money that wasn't in the DAO, but was raised by the DAO. In fact, if you look at Wikipedia right now, I keep meaning to go change it. They say the DAO only raised 11.5 million Ether, but really it raised about 12 million Ether. And because 500,000 of them were actually in this other contract called the extra balance. And we were able to move the extra balance into the DAO and then take that using proposals in the proposal system. The White Hat group was able to send that Ether to all of these other DAOs and gain 51% and then attack the DAOs within with those funds so that we were able to take over the DAO, those smaller DAOs completely, and then have them be controlled by the White Hat group. But we couldn't do that to the big one, to the major DAO hacker. But we were able to funnel some of the money in there, and we found a loophole where we could buy dark DAO tokens in the bad DAO, in the main DAO hackers thing. So then we had like 1,000 dark DAO tokens, and because of this bug that was called what was it called? Oh my god. This bug was like basically you could create a stalemate where you're constantly splitting the DAO, and you could split it forever such that you could never get funds out. So if the hard fork had never happened and we decided that, the DAO token holders had to take a hit, the White Hat group would have been able to return 70% of the funds. But the 30% that the DAO hacker had, there would be a constant battle every week, basically. Or let's see, it'd be every 35 days, there would be a battle that would continue the stalemate until either the White Hat group or the DAO hacker stopped fighting for those funds. And we would have just kept battling and battling and battling. And then those funds would probably still be locked up. And honestly, I was a little bit worried about that information coming out because to me, it was really important that the hard fork happened. Because this is just a mess. If that kind of stuff is happening, it's such a distraction for all the really good things that Ethereum, developers had in mind and in store for the world. And then there's this crazy DAO war that's just ongoing for the rest of Ethereum's history. It'd be so annoying.
Wow. I did not know at all this part of the story.
Yeah.
So this White Hat group, I mean, you mentioned some of these adventures during the DAO wars that you were just talking about, this amazing story. And like, who is in this group, and like, what is the White Hat group? How did it form? And like, what has this group been doing since?
There's only, at least for the DAO for the work that we did with the DAO, there's only 2 public members, which is Jordi, Belina, and I. And but then the White Hat group is really just a loosely affiliated group of trusted hackers in the Ethereum space. And we have done a lot of actions for some different token sales, and there were some other things that happened with the DAO, and just little random things that happen in the space where we kind of get alerted from our network within, I'm very well connected in the space, and it seems like whenever someone has a problem, I get to hear about it, like that trusted friend, it's a shoulder to cry on, right? But then sometimes we can actually take action. The biggest ones were, at least more recently, there was the Parity multisig hack, the first actual hack where Swarm City, Eternity, and Edgeless all had their multisigs emptied. And then Swarm City called me, and the White Hat group kind of happened to all be in, at least a lot of the core members of the White Hat group all happened to be in the same place at the same time. So it was like, Jordi, come over here. We got to look this up, and then we were able to drain the other, I think it was about 163 other multisig wallets that had Ether in them and tokens. And that ended up being like $210 million that Jordi had in his personal account, right? And so he was pretty paranoid over all that. It's like, we're just hanging out. He's a public person on the internet, and all of a sudden he has $210 million. Honestly, it was like we were probably overblowing it, but in his head, he was a marked man, right? So we were working, of course, with all the people that we could. There's like lots of security channels in Ethereum that we connect with about what to do with these funds and how to deal with all that. But it's just a funny story. We, like, when we went to bed that night, like Jordi and his wife wanted to sleep at home. And so like me and another White Hat went down there, and I literally slept on a mattress in front of the door with a baseball bat, right? Like, cause they don't have guns in Barcelona, so like, what are you going to do? It's not America, right? We've had assault rifles, but yeah, so then it was, we had this like week-long adventure where it's like, listen, we don't want to hold this money. We want to give it back as soon as possible. But it's like, where do we put it? Oh, we'll put it in a multisig. No, I don't think so. We want to give this back to people as soon as possible. So we deployed a new multisig for everyone while we were doing this while we were like really looking over the old multisigs and trying to figure out a safe way to give everyone back the funds. We ended up having all the old we deployed a new multisig for everyone, and then had them vote on to tell us where to send the funds using their multisig, create a signaling contract so they could say input a certain address, and then we'd send it there. And then for all the big accounts, we also had them call us, and we just made sure they were them and had them read us the address. Like, it was a big ordeal, and that was one thing. And then so that multisig action was pretty crazy. But then there's so many other random things people don't get to hear about because we get there first. There was this exchange vulnerability that happened just a few weeks ago. That there was an internal there was a way that you could make it look like you deposited funds into exchanges, and depending on how they actually process their deposits, they would give you money even though the transaction had actually failed. Etherscan would say it's a success. By all accounts, the transaction looked like it was a success. But if you look at the parity trace, it had failed in the middle of an internal transaction, and 6 out of the top 10 exchanges were vulnerable. And so we, had to figure out, how do I alert every exchange that deals with Ethereum, and get all these emails. And this was actually through a white hat that wasn't involved with the DAO hack, but he came in for the parity multisig adventure, and he discovered that vulnerability. And so Alexei, he's another, I guess, publicly known white hat person, and he's a superstar, and there's a lot of other random adventures that we have.
This for me harks back a little bit to something you mentioned before we started recording, of with smart contract security and this question of what if the DAO never happened. There's you were saying contract security was overlooked and really not something that people knew a lot about. How do you feel that has changed over the years?
First off, Solidity at the time, I think the DAO was written in 0.3.6. Right, so Solidity has gotten a lot better, and there's a lot more tools. I mean, we didn't even have the payable modifier back then, right? You could just send Ether anytime you want with any function call. There's a lot of UX problems, and but people learn from experience, and you have a lot more developed audit ecosystem. So if you write a smart contract, you can find an auditor. In 2000, when we did the DAO, the only auditor we had, there was no one who knew how to audit Solidity, period. Zero. We went to the people that audited Ethereum, and they don't know about Solidity, right? So now there's lots of options. There's a lot of clear patterns that people know to use, and it's a lot more developed and a lot easier to write safe-ish contracts. But in the end, you're putting money in programming language that's 2 years old. And I mean, if there's a bug in the Solidity compiler, which I think is just now being audited for the first time, right? There is so many ways that your money can disappear, right? And sadly, I get to hear about it all the time because I'm that guy, that gets to hear about these things. And so I'm paranoid, but yeah.
I have a question to go back to the white hat story. What's the mandate of the white hat hackers, white hat group?
Just do good. I mean, we don't really have a mandate. We're really not organized in any way. We just have a couple chat rooms that we hang out in, and when there's something interesting that's happening, it's we just kick it around and say, whoa, what's this? And then when it's urgent, there's usually a call to action, because basically we're just good devs with balls. That's all. We're not worried about what's the liability? What could happen? No, it's just oh, shit. We have the opportunity to do something, so let's do it.
So somewhere the decision was taken to actually do the hard fork. What was the lead up to that like?
Well, I mean, the decision was first started when Vitalik basically blurted it out when we were having a discussion with all the big wigs in Ethereum that we could find, about it's the council of elders, you could say. It's let's figure out what to do. And he was just we should just hard fork. And then after that, it became almost I just kind of decided, yeah, because I always felt, I was always coming from the perspective of the community. I was a community organizer, and that's the only way, that was the only clear path for everything to be cleanly resolved. And for the people who, put their funds in that contract to be made whole. So it was the clear path for me to push. So I just went on every social media. I went on a social media campaign all month, just pushing and pushing and pushing and explaining why the hard fork was the right way. And, which brought up a lot of questions about immutability and all these really interesting things that we learned about how blockchains actually work. And, that they're based off social consensus and not necessarily immutability. But then when there was this idea that maybe we could get around the hard fork by creating a soft fork that would lock the funds in place. And, my memory on this might be a little rusty, so you might have to fact check me or double check it. But basically that was, that soft fork was found to be technically infeasible because it would allow people to DOS the network by sending transactions to, allow the DAO hacker to DOS the network or allow someone to DOS the network. There was also this idea that, if the DAO hacker has 4% of all Ether in existence, and we eventually move to proof of stake, that could be a huge problem, right? Like we have this clear person who does not have Ethereum's best interest in mind. So because of all these, weird things, and of course the fact that he's a bad person, and at least one of the things that I was always pushing is like, all it takes for evil to win is for good men to do nothing. I'm butchering the quote, but you guys know what I mean. So I think my brain is fried after so many days of conferences. But yeah, so we had to do a lot of testing, a lot of auditing over the smart contract that we were going to put all the funds in. There was a lot of work. Pretty much every core developer from Parity and Geth had to take a pause on whatever they were doing and start looking at this like really urgent major change in the protocol. There had never been an irregular state change before, and everyone was making it up as they went along. And so it was really important, and it was really, I feel really bad because it slowed Ethereum down by who knows how long.
How many days? So did you have 35 days from the hack?
Yeah, 35 days from the hack. It was basically when you split the DAO. That was the function that the DAO hacker called. You have a 28-day funding period where you have your new DAO, right? You have a new DAO that can receive funds from anything to buy tokens in. And then after that, you have 7 days before you could split. Or if no one else had tokens in the DAO hacker's DAO, then they would be able to have, after 14 days, they'd be able to have a proposal go through that would send all the money somewhere else that then it could go to exchanges or something. So 35 days before a split, that would move it to a new DAO, and then you'd have another 35 days before it can move again, right? Or 42 days for it to actually hit an exchange. But to keep everything clean, we really had to hit that 35 days because we didn't know what the address would be that the new DAO would be generated at.
How many people do you think in total were working on that at the time?
Oh, man. Probably in one form or another, I'm sure over 100. Basically the whole Ethereum community was distracted by that the whole time. There was nothing else going on. Everything else was put on pause. There was too many unknown variables. So pretty much the whole Ethereum community was working on it. But concretely, on the core clients, there were probably 6 or 7 on each. A lot of advisors and well-known people in the community were auditing the withdrawal contract. And then, obviously all of Slockit. So I would say a good 50 people were officially working on that all month.
Did people bond through this?
Oh yeah. The White Hat group for sure, right? We went to war together, and I would say a lot of people, the White Hat group never even met each other in person until the ETC thing happened, and we had to run off to Switzerland and figure out a legal strategy, right? And then we all met each other in the Swiss airport, So there were a lot of friends made, and a lot of people went, became solidified there. There were a lot of startups that were planning to work with the DAO, like Golem. Golem actually had a planned proposal for the DAO, and there were a lot of other groups that were planning on proposing things to the DAO that probably all got to have that experience of this major shift, and in a way not quite a rite of passage, but a boot camp kind of experience. And I'm sure their relationships were stronger afterwards.
That's why I'm sort of sad to see that original vision of the DAO go away and not it never really came back in full force of it was an actually good ICO model. You could actually raise money and there was community voting, and there would like you would have the good things of like a normal traditional VC round where like you could actually talk about, you know, milestones and funding for, you know, specific projects, and like not giving someone 100 million on day one and just hoping that it was okay.
Absolutely. I cannot say that enough. And that's why Giveth was really started, and that was our first mandate, effectively, you could say, was to create that proposal system. And it just is so disgusting to me the way ICOs work today. You just throw all the money in the multi-sig and hope that they're going to do what you think they're going to do. That is so silly. That is no one works like that. Nothing works like that. And what we did is we created mini-me token contracts so we could have better governance. We created the vault contract, which had an escape hatch, whitelist, time delay, and owner to cancel payments, and all of these other centralizing security features that could then be removed as you trust the code base. And we created a milestone tracker. And we created these for charity. This was the White Hat Group's vision, was that we could practice becoming like a real blockchain-based entity in the area of making the world a better place. Because when in the donation space, you don't have investors, you have donors. And there's a lot less of a hang-up on, am I going to get an ROI? And a lot less pressure to push you to make something like really profitable. It's just they want to see some good work be done with their funds. And in that environment, we felt it was a lot easier to play around with decentralized governance mechanisms and becoming a blockchain-based entity, like becoming a real DAO. So we did that in a response to what was happening with the ICOs. So although we didn't really know that at the time, so I guess it wasn't really a response, because it was just a premonition in a way, because we could see that smart contracts weren't trusted anymore. And so we then started this like decentralized governance project called Giveth, but it was in the charity space. And as we evolved, we gathered more people from the charity space. And also as we evolved, other projects cropped up like Aragon and Colony. And we were like, oh, these guys got it. You know, I mean, we're not trying to change we're just trying to fill a gap. And if Aragon and Colony seem to have like a good strategy here, we don't need to work on decentralized governance. They'll do it for us. And we started working more in the actual transparency and accountability space, because that's what charities need. And a lot of people from the charity space started joining our team and really pushing us more towards that, making the world a better place with blockchain tech, to the point that Giveth became a community focused on blockchain for good. We don't have a legal entity. We're really just a group of people that are trying to use blockchain technology to make the world a better place. And we have all sorts of random projects and people that are, generally the people that hang out in the Giveth Riot are the kind of guys that they have a really good idea that they're really passionate about working on, but it doesn't have a clear funding model. It's really more altruistic, or at least attacking a problem they feel needs to be solved. Sometimes it is like directed at the less fortunate in some ways, but a lot of times it's just like, hey, I want to solve this proof of uniqueness, like this bright ID, or I want to create a wedding contract, a wedding DApp, right? Because I got married on the blockchain and I want to create a DApp that everyone can use so that they can get married on the blockchain, right? And there's all these other cool projects that we kind of support with some random tools that we built. And it all evolved out of the DAO and the hard fork and this whole White Hat Group experience. It just kind of floated into that.
How would somebody use Giveth? Like from what you've described, I mean, can anyone use it? Can any group use it?
So Giveth, it gets almost confusing like Bitcoin, right? There's the Bitcoin network, and then there's Bitcoins that you can pass around.
Okay.
Right? And it's the same with Giveth. We have the Giveth DApp, which is is our flagship product, which just won the super demo yesterday at EdCon, which is so cool. But what we do with the DApp is we try to allow anybody to create their own decentralized altruistic community, a community that's focused around a cause. So that cause could be open source block explorers. It could be ending homelessness in Toronto. It can be anything you want. And this is a place, this is kind of, instead of starting a nonprofit or an NGO or something like that, some kind of legal structure, you can start a blockchain-based entity and just define your own terms around how you want that to be governed and organized. And you can collect funds and then distribute those funds in a completely transparent and accountable way, so that the donor, when they send funds in, they can actually see where those funds go. And at some point, if they don't like it, they can even veto and say, oh, I actually don't want to support that open source block explorer. I like the other one. Or I don't really trust you as my delegate anymore. I want to move it to something else. Or even like, hey, my brother just broke his arm and I need this money to pay for hospital bills. I'm going to take my money out completely, right? But they can only do that before it's locked for a specific purpose. So this is what's really cool about the Giveth DApp, is it's really trying to solve the problem of transparency and accountability that we have in the charitable world today. But right now, our DApp isn't quite done, and it's still, we had this issue where the gas was too high, good old CryptoKitties. We were like, we deployed it, and then and the CryptoKitties started cropping up, and we just couldn't bring ourselves to actually say, this is a final answer, even though we had it all done. It was so sad. So now we actually are doing this crazy thing, and we moved our DApp to Rinkeby, and we're bridging the Rinkeby chain to the mainnet. And that, because of that experience of scaling issues, we started a whole group around scaling now and started investigating different scaling solutions. And the parity bridge was actually probably our favorite, which we interviewed first. But because we want to, attack these tragedy of the commons issues, we actually went all the way through and interviewed a bunch of people about their different scaling solutions and had a whole little gathering in maybe a symposium, you could say, in Barcelona, where everyone got to present their ideas and talk to each other in person and build relationships so they can solve their scaling issues. And that all started because we had scaling problems, and so we're still recovering. Our DApp is almost usable. Right now we have a successful, kind of what we call the ghetto bridge between Robston and Rinkeby. It's pretty centralized, and we know we have to do these extra security precautions because of the centralization. But eventually, when you guys finish the parity bridge, and when I guess you guys, do you guys work for parity?
I work for Parity.
Okay. So I used to work for Parity.
Okay, so then I can say that when you guys finish the Parity bridge,
which will hopefully be soon.
Yeah, then we can replace our ghetto bridge with something a little more secure and trusted across those waters, right? But then and that's when we'll probably open it up for people to actually use it. But right now, if you want to use Giveth, you use our community structure. We have these cool projects like Reward DAO that help fund people that are just doing what they want to do. If you want to do some kind of work on some kind of project, and you just want the community to bounce ideas off of, maybe to find contributors from a group of people that are all interested in just kind of working in the space and learning Solidity and learning how to work in the Ethereum world, you can join our group called Social Coding. And we actually have a project where we dish points to people that are doing cool things. And then at the end of the month, we kind of count up the points, and $4,000 are given away to the people who receive the points. And what's really cool here is you don't know how much money you're getting until way later. So there isn't this cheapening of your labor by getting just a little bit. This is one of the problems in the charity space, and that's why we created the Reward DAO, is that volunteers don't want to be paid, but yet they need to be rewarded because of the opportunity cost of devoting their time. How do you tell your girlfriend, yeah, I would go on a hike with you, but I want to do this really nice thing instead, right? It's no, but I love you, I want to go on a hike. It's a lot easier to be oh yeah, I did this I was deving on my computer in my mom's basement instead of hiking with you, but hey, I just got $300. Do you want to go out to a nice dinner, right? At least there's a positive feedback loop, and it's a kind of an experiment to distance that weird thing that happens with money when you receive it, and your monkey mind goes wild with that stuff. And so like we're just experimenting and playing around with decentralized governance tools, but at the same time trying to support people that are doing cool things in the space, like those super demos that we destroyed yesterday. No, I'm just kidding. I'm like gave my card to like half of them, saying you guys should come into our space, and we can help with advice, because it's kind of like this group that is all really cool, like back how the Ethereum subreddit used to be, and we're all just like working on our projects and trying to help each other out. And we actually have this we have different strategies to get people to work together. And then, of course, at the end of the month, if you make a video and tell us what you are doing, you'll end up being able to cash out your points, and you make $300-500. Like, that's cool, and it's fun, and you get this feedback, and you get to keep going, and you feel motivated to continue working on your project.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
What a journey you just took us on with this story. This has been epic.
Yeah.
And it lands in this place that's like, we're recording this right after EdCon, and you had just done this competition and won based on this idea that sort of all started back during a pretty...
It is quite an amazing journey, and it's been a fantastic episode.
Do you have any sort of last thoughts that you want to share?
I mean, the only thing I would say is if any of that interested you and you want to come join our community in Giveth, it's giveth.io/join, and join our Riot, and we just hang out and have a good time. And, hopefully we can, fix these tragedy of the commons issues in Ethereum and then eventually the world.
Awesome. Well, it's been an absolutely fantastic episode. I've loved this story through and through. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast and speaking to us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.